There it is.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Superstar Communicator podcast and live stream. Welcome, everybody, from Nick and myself. I am very, very excited today because we have Karen Eber on from Georgia, USA, who is an author, leadership consultant, and keynote speaker. Her TED Talk on how your brain responds to stories continues to inspire millions. Her book, The Perfect Story, How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire, HarperCollins 2023, was selected as a Next Big Ideas Club must-read, and I will put the link in the chat. As the CEO and Chief Storyteller of Eber Leadership Group, Karen helps Fortune 500 companies like GE and Microsoft build leaders, teams, and culture, one story at a time. She guest lectures at universities including MIT and Stanford, and is a former head of culture, learning, and leadership development at GE and Deloitte. Karen frequently contributes to and is featured in Fast Company, Quartz, Entrepreneur, MSN, Forbes, Inc., and Business Insider. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
We are very, very privileged to have you on this live stream. Why stories? Why are they so powerful?
It cuts through the noise in this world that is very busy and fast-paced, and there's so much information coming at you. A story can reach through and grab the attention of your brain and make you be interested. I spent this career in companies like General Electric and Deloitte, where I was trying to connect with people globally and trying to shape organizational culture, which only happens when someone thinks about what the culture means to them and how they want to respond, how they want to behave. And I found that it didn't matter where people were in the world. It didn't matter what generation they were from or how they identified. The stories gave them that chance to have that reflection and think about what they wanted to do, even in situations they had never faced before.
It's interesting. One of the questions that I had later on was, what about different cultures and different age groups and identity? Do you need to have different stories or modify the stories that you have? How do you play that?
Think of it like when you're on an airplane and the person next to you leans over and says, "What do you do for work?" And you make this split-second decision of, how detailed am I going to be? Am I going to tell them the version that I tell someone at a networking event that is deep and technical and rich of what I do? Or am I going to tell them the version that I tell my aunt that has no idea what I do for a living? And I'm just going to simplify it. And at its core, it's the same thing. You may shape it slightly differently. You may put in different expressions that they're going to connect with. So you tailor your story for audiences, but they do resonate no matter where you are in the globe.
Now, there are possibly people who are watching this, who are involved. Please feel free to comment and to say hello as well. Nick, do you have a question?
Yeah, you mentioned your book provides an ultimate toolbox for narrative excellence. When starting a book off, what would you say the best thing to do before starting the writing process is?
Anytime you're going to tell a story, whether you are writing fiction or nonfiction, or you are getting ready to tell a story in a meeting, sit down and think about who your audience is. If you were sitting across the table from that ideal person or people, who is that? What are they? What do they share in common? So it's almost like building a persona, just like you might in marketing, of what is the demographics of this person? What do they know? What are their interests? What is it that you want them to experience with your story? What do you want them to feel internally and perhaps even take action on? What's their mindset today and what might be an obstacle? Because the more clear you are on that, the more examples and expressions and things that you can put in so that that person on the other side of the table feels like you were talking directly to them. So the secret of storytelling is it doesn't begin with the story or the idea. It always begins with the audience that you're telling it to.
And when do you use stories? I mean, are you just a story fest that all the time? Your whole communication is a series of stories.
That would be a little exhausting. So the average person can use stories far more than they do. And we naturally do when we're with friends, when we're, at dinners or out having fun together, we won't even debate, do I tell a story? We just keep telling them. And by telling a story, that makes someone else tell a story. And that is a story fest. But for some reason, we get into business settings or more formal settings, and we feel like we have to talk in a business tone and we have to be very structured, and we take away a little bit of our humanity. And that's when we should be telling them. Whether you are meeting with the CEO or whether you are presenting data or you are starting a meeting, there's an opportunity to tell a story. And it doesn't have to be a long one, but it is this way to put oxygen into what you're talking about and make it be memorable and make people be excited. So personally, I am not a story fest. I am an introvert, which...
Me too.
Yes. And storytelling is a great superpower for introverts because there's research that says that introverts speak less words per day than extroverts. So extroverts will generally process out loud and just keep speaking until they find what they want to say. Whereas introverts want to be really specific, and a story can build an idea and have a ripple effect that lasts beyond the message, but also packs more meaning into what you're saying. And much of storytelling is preparing what you want to do. So as an introvert, all of that time you're spending internally thinking about things can turn things into a great story that when you do speak has a loud echo.
Oh, that's brilliant to know.
And is your book focused on fiction or non-fiction writing?
So the perfect story is meant to help people find and tell the perfect story for any setting. So if you are looking to tell a story live or give a toast or work on a nonfiction book, it will take you through it. If you are working on fiction, what will help you in the book is I talk about some principles of what's happening in your brain when you experience stories, but more importantly, what do you then do with that in your stories to make sure that your audience is really engaged? And so it's not a book on here's how you write a fiction piece of work, but there are things in it that will help you be intentional about how you are creating your work to make sure the audience is the most immersed as they can be.
So what is going on in the brain when you tell stories?
There's so many different things, but at the most simplest level, as you are experiencing a story, think about when you're in a movie and you're sitting and not moving, but your heart starts racing as James Bond is like running across the rooftops and he's in a chase. Your brain is actually lighting up in some of those same patterns as the characters. It's almost this artificial reality where through stories, your brain lets you experience things that you have never had before. So this is why we get nervous in a horror film, because the neurochemicals are released in our body as though we are that character that is in danger. But it's also why we get goosebumps or tear up at a really sentimental moment. But that's only when a story is told really well. There's a few things that need to go into a story for that to happen. One is that just by me telling you a story, you experience a little bit of empathy toward me. So it doesn't matter if I'm telling you a personal story or if I'm recounting someone else's story, the very act of doing it in an authentic, genuine way creates a feeling of empathy towards me. And the more you experience that, the more the brain will release this neurochemical called oxytocin, which is this bonding chemical that we see often between mothers and babies or when there's these moments of connection. And this is why you have been to an offsite retreat and you feel bonded with the people around you, or you see a friend that you haven't seen for a while over dinner and you share stories and you catch up and you feel closer to them. It's because of this neurochemical shift. You had this moment of connection, oxytocin was released. And what happens, the more oxytocin that's released, the more increase in trust that the audience experiences. So just by telling a story, if it were in a business environment and a leader tells a story, people will respond and they will have trust towards them because they have done this thing. But that can translate through, this is why maybe you're on social media and you watch someone you enjoy tell a story about something about their life. You feel like you know them. It's because you've gone through this neurochemical shift and you have developed these feelings of trust and empathy towards them.
You mentioned about authenticity when you share stories. Could you go into a little bit more detail so that we all understand what makes an authentic story?
Yeah, it's, I think, easier to probably start with what doesn't. So
Okay,
think of maybe a journalist or a politician that you experienced something they shared and you just thought, I don't believe them. We're really good detectors at manipulation, or when someone is maybe withholding information or crafting a narrative in a way that's really intentional. And you immediately feel this questioning or almost this distrust, which can happen. We are really good detectors of that. And the problem is, in the example of any politician or journalist where we experience it, we almost decide we're done and that's it. And we're not going to trust them anymore. And it changes how we perceive. So authentic stories are the opposite of that, where you feel like, I have a sense of who this person is. And it's not that I'm sharing the most private, revealing story and the most intimate details. It's that you feel like you're getting me in this, that you're not getting a robotic delivery, that you're getting me giving a sense of my perspective and my emotions and my mannerisms. And you feel that. That's the authenticity. When it feels very stiff and formal. And I don't mean that someone's nervous to tell it, because sometimes we are a little stiff and formal when we're nervous. But if it just feels too practiced and staged and rehearsed, then we get pulled out of the story and we're noticing these things and it doesn't feel genuine. So authenticity is, I feel like I'm getting your perspective and why you're telling this. And that is something that I want to hear.
Great. I was just going to ask about one section of your book. What do you mean by hacking the art of storytelling?
Oh,
So yeah, there's this phrase that people love to throw around that I hate, which is that we are hardwired for stories. And we're not. We are no more hardwired for stories than we are hardwired to run a marathon. Like, yes, there are physical components that can get engaged in a great story, just like there are physical components we can engage to run a marathon. But if you don't know how to engage them and you don't train and you don't practice, you are going to be in a world of hurt. So I hate this phrase, we're hardwired for stories, because it implies that every story we hear is compelling and engaging and meaningful. And I don't know what your holiday tables look like, but my holiday tables have that uncle that will tell the same story over and over and over. And you're like, we can almost recite this with you. Like, there's nothing great about that story that I am hardwired to perceive. So hacking the art of storytelling is this idea that it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one makes a difference in it. And there are a few different principles for what you consider when you're building a story to make sure that we are leveraging as much of the audience's brain as we can. So a couple of them are, one is that your brain is lazy. The brain is meant to keep you alive, and you stayed alive yesterday. So the brain says, like, you did it yesterday. Let's just do the exact same thing the exact same way, because the brain always wants to hoard calories. It is the stingiest of bankers because it wants to make sure it has calories to keep your body functioning, right? From respiration to circulation to all the different things you need to move your body and anticipate the environment around you. It's got this non-negotiable bucket of calories. And the more tired you are or hungry, make those calories a little inefficient. So it's always trying to protect and make sure it has enough. But there is this discretionary bucket that is attention, focus, engagement. And if you think of you start a show and it just doesn't catch your attention and you turn it off after 10 minutes, or you're reading a book and you can't get into it, or on social media, you flip past posts that are boring. It's the brain saying, like, this is not worth the calorie spend. It's the same thing that happened in university when that professor is droning on and you start making your weekend plans and you drift off and then you come back, or in a meeting when someone's going row by row through data. It's not that you can't pay attention. It's that our brains are not meant to be fully immersed all day, every day. They're meant to come in and come out, come in and come out. And so this idea that the brain is lazy has a big role in storytelling, because you are always fighting the brain's temptation to withdraw calories, to withdraw attention and focus and immersion. So that means you need to put things in the story that do build the tension, that are adding events that are unexpected, that are sequencing them in a way where I don't necessarily know what's happening next, that are engaging my senses, because when we start to do that, I get a fully formed image in my head. And so leaning into this principle helps you then be intentional about putting things there that almost make it irresistible to the brain. And the second one I'll talk about is this idea of in groups and out groups. So we experience stories through our perspective. And when we can tell a story that makes the audience feel like a member of the in group, they feel like there's some shared values or interests or aspirations. So in sales, this is that I'll have what she's having. Like, I want that. When you tell a story that connects someone to those values or those aspirations, they can't help but feel that and feel a part of something, which can inform decision making. But the same is true with out groups. So the Red Cross will tell the story of a family whose home was destroyed by a natural disaster, and they're struggling to get food, clothing, shelter, electricity. And you experience this story while you are in electricity, just feet away from indoor plumbing, and you have food, and you realize how different your circumstances are. And that often motivates decision-making and action, which in the case of a charity is often a donation or support. So when we're telling stories, we have this choice of, what is that experience that I want the audience to have? Do I want them to feel a part of something? Do I want them to feel different, or both? Which, like in a job interview, you want to create both. You want that hiring manager to notice where you have things that are similar and you would be a great fit addition into the company, but you also want to share where you have experiences and knowledge that are different, that can help grow and stretch the team. And so hacking the art of storytelling becomes these choices that you make for, what am I doing to engage that audience's brain, but also be really thoughtful about what I'm having them feel and when I'm doing it, so that it's almost a Jedi mind trick of, I've now pulled them into my story and they didn't even realize they were coming here.
Now, you talk about stories that we use in business, that we use when we're meeting friends and catching up with people. How long should they be?
It's not so much the length as it is how well it's constructed.
Okay.
I think everybody thinks like there's got to be a perfect minute story, and there really isn't. But if you're telling a long story that's not well constructed, we're going to drift off. If you're telling a short story that doesn't have enough in it, people aren't going to remember it. So in general, it's usually under 3 minutes, but it's really, how are you building the tension? How are you engaging the audience? Think of comedians. Some of them tell 15-minute stories, and you are right there every step of the way wanting to know what happens next. And it's because they've built it in a really engaging way.
I noticed that you are a keynote speaker as well, and sometimes people use stories. Well, they use stories a lot in keynote speaking. One thing that I found is when people almost do little chapters, and they'll do one and then do a next chapter of the story and then finish off with it later on. What are your thoughts about that?
It can be really great, especially because a lot of times when they finish with it, the audience doesn't realize there's more to the story. And so they come back at the end and they punch the audience right in the feels with it. It's, again, just all about how do you structure it in a way so that there is a little bit that's unexpected and the audience is paying attention. I've done that. I also do sometimes 15 stories throughout a keynote. And sometimes it's a really short story with an example, and sometimes it's ongoing. You can play with so many different things.
I'm sure we have both been in conferences where there are a series of people when I was a boy, or various various things, and you think, oh no, it's a story. How can you start a story so people think, oh goody, it's a story, rather than, oh, not another one?
First thing that I think so many people do wrong that is easy to fix is you are announced to the stage, or you are starting a meeting, or there's an opportunity to speak. And so many people start with, hi, I'm Karen. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much. Good morning. Does everybody have good travels in? And all of this is sending their brain into lazy mode. When I start a keynote, I walk on stage and I start the story right away. I also don't start with, let me tell you a story, because I've never heard a comedian say, let me tell you a joke. So I start right with the story, and I don't even talk about myself or my credentials until after the story. And it works every time. I have to warn the AV team, because in the back of the room, they're in a flurry thinking I've forgotten something, or I'll often blank out the slide. And so they see a black slide and she's not talking and they panic, but it is going to capture attention. The thing to start with is an interesting sentence that is going to be compelling. Time and place is a good thing to start with. Of you're setting the time of the story and what you're doing, or something interesting about it. But as long as those first 2-3 sentences you got something interesting, the audience will be with you. Just start right away. Don't worry about you're being rude by not saying good morning, thank you, my name is. Just jump right in. You can always add that at the end, and at that point you already have the audience on your side.
Brilliant advice. Nick?
I had going back to what you said about comedians, how can humor keep engagement, and are there any other kind of emotional devices you can use to keep that engagement?
Humor is a great way to release tension. So if you are plotting the energy of a story, right, you want to have it climb and release, build and release tension. So tension is going to happen when there are different events that are raising the stakes, or there's a dilemma, or we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. And so if you have a long story, you're going to want to build and release tension a few different times, because this is going to capture the audience's attention. And humor is a great way to do that. So if you think of the comedian, they give that zinger of a joke that you didn't expect. They say the line that is almost opposite of what you were thinking they were going to say. And that makes everyone laugh. It releases it. And then you start building again. So humor can have a great place in it. I am not the comedian on stage. I am not the person that's going to be making the audience laugh every 10 minutes, but I do use humor as unexpected phrases, or a quick joke, or something that is usually not what the audience is expecting, and then they laugh, or there's a situation in a story that is amusing. And so people love to laugh. It's good to try to work it in, but make sure that it feels genuine and not forced.
Now, tell us about your book. For anybody who is watching live, I have put the link through to Karen's book. Could you tell us briefly about your book?
I have found that many people love the idea of storytelling, but have no idea where to start. And they feel like they can't tell a story unless they have the perfect story to tell. And the perfect story doesn't exist. The perfect story is formed by getting really clear on your audience and how you are building an idea for them that is meaningful. So it's really meant to take people through this process of first understanding what's happening in your head when you listen to stories. And this is done in a really relatable way where I give you these 5 science principles that you can leverage when you're building a story. But then we get into how do you find ideas for stories to build a toolkit before you ever need to tell one? And then how do you tailor them for your audience and choose the right one when it's time to tell a story? How do you structure that story and then put in all the things that's going to make the brain pay attention? How do you tell stories with data? How do you avoid manipulating with stories? How do you play with the sequencing of the story to make it be the most compelling? And I even get into how do you use your body? How do you tell stories physically if you're telling them live?
Yeah. Oh, this brilliant. Before we finish, what are your 3 top tips to share with the audience? I do have them written down if you want me to prompt you.
Sure. Let's go with what my prompts were.
They were find ideas for stories, how to tailor them to each audience, and how to structure them.
Yeah. So the first tip is that you want to build a list of potential story ideas before you ever need to tell a story, because your brain's going to be more relaxed and you're going to notice things, and it makes the process of choosing an idea so much easier. So have a place, a notebook, an app, whatever works for you, where you start thinking of your professional experiences and personal experiences and things that you notice as you move through the world. Maybe you saw a documentary you loved or heard something on a podcast that connected with you. You want to write down enough so that when you come back to this list later, you know what that idea is. But you want to build a list of potential ideas before you need to tell a story, without worrying about who am I telling this to and why am I telling it. Because when it's time to tell a story and you get clear on your audience and you know what you want them to feel and what you want them to do, you can now go back to this list and say, which one of these will let me build an idea that I can connect to that? Most of the time, it's not anything on the list, but by going down the list, a whole new idea will emerge. And so it just serves as a process for helping you get ideas. And remind me of the second two.
The second one is how to tailor them for each audience, which you have touched on before.
Yeah, just each time you want to think about, what is it that I want this group to feel? What do I want them to do? What is their mindset today about this idea? And what might be an obstacle in getting them to shift that? Because then as you're building your story, as you're putting a structure in place, you can think about, have I done those things? Have I addressed what might be an obstacle? How can I make sure that I'm putting together something that feels meaningful for them?
Oh, brilliant. And the third one, how to structure them.
Yeah. So there's an easy 4-part story structure that I encourage. And there's many models. There's models like the hero's journey, which the Star Wars films were built on. But I find for your average person, that is really quite complicated. They're trying to figure out how to put their idea in there. And when it doesn't fit easily, they give up. So the 4-part story structure isn't necessarily the order you will tell the story in, but this is, you are going to cook a meal and you want to make sure you've got all of the ingredients before you start. So it helps you organize your thinking. So you are going to write 1 or 2 sentences for each of these. The first is the context, which is, what is the setting and why should the audience care? You would write 1 or 2 sentences for that. The second is the conflict. This is the fuel for your story, because when you run out of conflict, you run out of story. So what is that tension? What is at stake? What is that thing that is being explored or needs to be addressed? The third is the outcome. What happens because of the tension? What do people do? And the last is the takeaway. And the takeaway is, what is that overall message that you want the audience to come away with? And the beauty of the takeaway is you can look and see whatever you write for the takeaway. Can you connect that back to what you said you wanted the audience to feel or do? Because if you can't make that connection, then you need to go back and rework it, because it's meant to make sure that your story structure supports that. So in 5 minutes, you can take your idea and build this basic structure, which is great if you have to tell the story right away live. But it's also meant to help you think about the major pieces. And then, of course, you would add more onto it to make it be the most engaging.
Oh, that's fantastic. So before you finish, could you tell us where you can get your book?
It is everywhere books are sold, in hard copy, ebook, and audiobook. You can also go to my website, which is my name, Kareneber, and there's a book page on there that can tell you all about it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. Nick, do you have anything to add?
That sounds really interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very, very much for coming on today. I believe that storytelling is core communication, because, as you say, it is connecting with other people, helping people to build trust and business relationships with you. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for everyone who has been watching or listening. Until next time, this is the Superstar Communicator podcast and live stream. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.